Johnson. I think you'll find that this report is comprehensive and thorough and sets the example of at least what I'm expecting from DOC in terms of administrative investigations of a death or major injury or major incident in our facilities in the future. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tris Coffin and Tim Doherty from the law firm of Downs, Racklin, and Martin.
Thank you, Secretary Smith, and thank you, Commissioner Baker, and thank you also, Rachel, and welcome to everyone from the press. We were retained to investigate the tragic death of Kenneth Johnson. Kenneth Johnson was a 60-year-old inmate who became deceased on December 7th, 2019. He was an inmate at the Northern State Correctional Facility. This was an unexpected death. It was a death that raised a lot of questions about how it occurred and why it occurred and whether it could have been prevented. We were retained to look into some of those questions and see if we could get some answers. I'm going to make some comments here today, but I'll refer you to the report as sort of the central focus of our remarks and our opinions on this matter. And so I ask you to take some time and look at that. And that really is the basis of our investigation. The steps we took in investigating this matter were, I think, commonsensical. We interviewed the witnesses who were around at the time of Mr. Johnson's death. We reviewed Department of Corrections policies, records, and investigative reports. We reviewed medical records to the extent that we had those, and looked at surveillance tapes. Throughout the evening of December 6th and December 7th, Mr. Johnson was in the infirmary at the Northern State Correctional Facility, and there's high quality surveillance tape that does not have audio, but has pretty detailed footage about what transpired. Essentially, during the course of December 6th and December 7th, Mr. Johnson was in apparent distress during the late evening and early morning hours of December 6th and December 7th. He repeatedly and persistently complained about not being able to breathe. This condition was clearly brought to the attention of corrections staff and medical staff on site at the facility. Specifically, there were 3 1025s, as the term is called, that were called during the course of December 6th and December 7th. A 1025 is a code for an urgent response to an urgent situation, be it medical or otherwise. The first 1025 was called at 1027. A second was called at about 12:20 a.m. on December 7th. And a third one was called a little bit after 2 a.m. Later in the morning on December 7th. During the first 1025 at 1027, numerous witnesses from both corrections staff and medical staff, both in recalling the incident and documented contemporaneously, recalled that Mr. Johnson complained about not being able to breathe. There were attempts to give him some medical treatment, and he had the attention of corrections staff, but he was essentially given a nebulizer, and the staff left him in his current state. It appeared he continued to be in distress, perhaps feeling a little better, but they left him, and away he was left, and they went about their duties. Mr. Johnson was on a 30-minute checks by corrections staff, and he was checked according to the logs during that time period, and didn't appear to get into any particularly significant distress during that time period, but also didn't appear that his symptoms were alleviated either. At about 12:20 a.m., Mr. Johnson was found by a corrections staff officer lying in the bathroom adjacent to the infirmary. He was in significant distress at that point, continued to complain about not being able to breathe. He was escorted back to the main infirmary area, where he continued to persistently complain that he couldn't breathe, asked to be transported to North Country Hospital, which has an emergency room. Corrections staff and nursing staff responded to him. Again, they didn't provide any granting of his request to be seen by a physician or to go to the hospital. They made some administrations to him, but at the end of the interaction, took a pretty firm line with him that they were not going to tolerate his request to go to the hospital, and they were not going to acquiesce to that, and that he was to stay in his bed and lie down. Mr. Johnson can be seen on the surveillance tape appearing to be breathing very heavily in what would appear to a layperson to be in some respiratory distress, and to be gesturing towards his throat during this interaction. Everybody leaves after that 10:20. There was a period of some additional checks that were made on him. It's unclear how thorough those checks were. It does not appear that there were additional checks by the nursing staff after that time. At approximately 2:15 a.m., one of the on-site nurses hears a banging on the infirmary window by one of the inmates who's also in the infirmary with Mr. Johnson, and they are informed that he does not appear to be making the raspy noise that they've noticed him to be making when he's breathing, and the nurse responds to that. The nurse checks him. He appears to be unresponsive. Another 10:25 is called for that. Ambulances arrive and medical staff has arrived after CPR is initiated, but there's no further indication that Mr. Johnson is responsive or has any pulse or respiration at that point in time. He's noted to be dead on arrival at North Country Hospital. So in sum, despite these interactions with Mr. Johnson prior to his death, no doctor saw him. There was no evaluation in an emergency department despite access to one relatively nearby, and Mr. Johnson became deceased. The autopsy result concluded that the cause of death was a tumor in his esophagus, which obstructed his breathing, and that was the mechanism of his dying. In our report, we recount the events and the different statements and different facts that the witnesses and the documents and the surveillance tape shows, and we provide some opinions about our conclusion as to the facts there. We also make some policy recommendations that I'll detail here in a moment, but are detailed more thoroughly in our report. You know, first and foremost, I think looking at the surveillance tape and the factual background for this, the conclusion is inescapable that more could have and should have been done to care for Mr. Johnson. It just is not sufficient that an inmate complains persistently, incredibly, of not being able to breathe for a period of some hours consistently, does not see a doctor, does not go to the hospital, and then later on dies apparently from breathing complications. That is just not, as a policy matter, how Vermont should be conducting its business. And so that's sort of our primary recommendation and focus is on improving Department of Corrections policies to deal with that and to avoid trying to avoid this kind of a situation from happening again. Embedded within that recommendation are a number of others as well. As you'll see in the report, there are a number of sort of smaller possibilities for things to be better evaluated and perhaps the situation to be routed on a different course along the way. Some of those would include some strengthening of the policies surrounding holding cell use and medical checks. Another important one is it appears that based on the surveillance tape and witness statements that there was a threat of a disciplinary action in terms of transferring to a less adequate cell for Mr. Johnson if he didn't do what he was told and lie down in his bed, even though he was having significant difficulty breathing and was in great distress. We make a policy recommendation. The policies of the Department of Corrections should be strengthened to make sure that persons presenting with credible acute medical conditions aren't threatened with discipline and told to not voice those, because that could have been an element that played in the result here. We make a recommendation that the Department of Corrections implicit bias training be initiated and strengthened. Mr. Johnson was African American. It's hard to say whether that resulted in having differential treatment, but it's also hard to say that that wasn't the case. And based on our interviews with corrections staff, it seems like that is something that the department could well use to have strengthened. We also make some recommendations regarding supervisor contact and the extent to which corrections staff should be empowered and encouraged to reach out to supervisory staff if they have ambiguous or difficult to handle situations. Running a corrections facility is an incredibly complicated and difficult undertaking, one that requires incredibly important decision making and skill from people at all levels of the staff. Better communication and increased communication and better and strengthened policies to help guide that decision making we felt would be appropriate. Finally, we note in our report, and I think looking at the overall context of some of the interactions that you can see during the first two 1025s, I think the tone that comes from those is that the department could use stronger policies addressing a culture and possible attitude about the role of corrections staff relating to the inmate population generally. Obviously, inmates are there not at their choosing. They're guests of the state, and while they're in our state's custody, they need to be cared for and treated with dignity and respect. And so we asked the Department of Corrections to look closely at the extent to which there could be policies that would strengthen a culture of how inmates are treated in a way that, to make sure they are treated in a way that respects their dignity while they're in difficult circumstances, particularly when they're in difficult and acute medical circumstances. That's a summary of the report as I see it. I'd like to ask my partner, Tim Doherty, to make some additional remarks based on his reflections on this. He did a ton of work on this investigation. Tim.
Thanks, Tris, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Commissioner, and members of the press. My only additional remark would be that the specific opinions and recommendations with respect to both policy and culture that Tris just outlined and that are set forth in detail in our report, in our view, should be read in context and holistically. This tragedy, as we set forth, can best be addressed by a holistic approach and a holistic response with respect to both policy and culture together and in context, rather than focusing on one particular issue or one particular dynamic. And I would urge you to read the report in that context.
Great point. That's our overview, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you very much, both of you, for the work that you have done. Obviously, this is a disturbing report. There's plenty of blame to go around, from DOC to the medical provider, Centurion, to outside medical providers. I guess I just wanted to add this. I have a really deep concern about Centurion's refusal to participate in this independent investigation. It's both unfortunate and disconcerting, to me at least. We all hold responsibility for the care of the individuals in our state, especially in our correctional facilities, especially with those that are in custody. And the state has taken the responsibility seriously. You can see how we've looked at this, and we would expect our medical providers to do the same. I don't control Centurion, but I do control DOC. And without question, DOC could have and should have done more to prevent this tragedy. We continue to take a long, hard look at the events that led to Mr. Johnson's unfortunate death, and we will make the necessary changes to avoid such results in the future. Culture change, as I've said from the beginning, within the DOC is important. We have lots of strong and committed staff that are doing the hard work in challenging conditions, especially in this pandemic. We need to support those staff who do the job right and work to change the culture to ensure that all staff and supervisors care for the individuals in our custody and treat them with respect and dignity that they deserve. I think Commissioner Baker has been talking a lot about that lately. We need to address some of the core issues raised in the report as well. We have begun and need to continue to work to address racial equity, and these changes are vital to our society and within the Department of Corrections. We have embarked on a challenging and self-reflective work, and I think this report starts that process and continues that process to change the culture within our facilities. I will ask Commissioner Baker to sort of talk about steps that they have taken. We also need to examine and improve our policies, as the report points out. These include policies around internal communications, as the report pointed out, as well as medical concerns. And we need to take a look at the actions of our personnel involved in this incident. There are troubling details included in this report that suggest that some of our employees failed to take action when it was indicated. This includes medical staff failure to properly diagnose and respond to Mr. Johnson's condition. Those are important to consider, but we must look at what DOC people did as well, or should have done. I'll turn it over to Commissioner Baker from here.
Thank you, Secretary. I appreciate that. And first of all, I want to acknowledge the good work done by DRM, my old friend Tris Coffin and Tim Doherty put a lot of work into this, and I'm proud of the fact that the Vermont Department of Corrections cooperated with their review and investigation, and spent a lot of time supporting them. It was very hard as the commissioner. You know, the person that the statute says when someone's in the custody of the state of Vermont, it doesn't say the state of Vermont. It says in the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections, and that's me. And so as Tris gave that overview, even though I've read this report several times since receiving it at the end of last week, I've read all the other reports. It was still very difficult for him to hear him describe the circumstances of what happened to Mr. Johnson. And I have said this before, both at my testimony in front of Joint Justice on August 6th of this year, and also when we did the press conference on the 13th of July, responding to the Prisoners' Rights Office. I offer my condolences to the Johnson family as the Commissioner of Corrections. As was reported, this was preventable, and that makes it very difficult. But I want to thank the good work that was done by DRMR on this project. A couple comments about what the Secretary referred to. It's important that we do administrative reviews of critical incidents to include deaths, near deaths, and other critical incidents inside our facilities and within corrections. Tris referred to this. It's very challenging running facilities, jails, and running the Department of Corrections. It's very challenging doing this work. The only way we can get better at what we do is being open to, willing for clarity, accountability, and transparency to ask for outside reviews like this. It's the only way we're going to get better, both individually, as individuals in the organization, but as an organization as a whole. The process to address some of the recommendations, even before we had the recommendations, had started. And I'll go through those in a few minutes. But I want to go back to comments that I made at the Joint Justice Committee back in August. We've had 45 deaths in 10 years inside our correctional system. 45 deaths, 10 years. That's way too many. We have a very challenging population sometimes when it comes to medical care, mental health challenges. We have to get better at the way we deal with those who are in our custody and in our care. And what I'm looking at as the commissioner, and what the secretary's asked me to do since I got here in January, is to take a look at a systematic, and as Tim put it, holistic changes that are going to change the culture of the organization. I'm not saying something to the media that I haven't said to staff repeatedly, internally, privately, and at meetings with other staff members about culture. We need to change our culture. Let me talk a little bit about the significant medical changes that have occurred. Since this incident, we changed medical providers. Vital Corps is now our medical provider. And the same folks that were working there, some of them are no longer working at Northern State. There is better staffing in the system now. There are more registered nurses in the system. The leadership of Vital Corps, a new contractor, has restructured the leadership team, which has created a better communication. Just this week, we started inviting Vital Corps into operational meetings that have nothing to do with healthcare, in order for them to see a better view of how the Department of Correction operates and how we can better interface to provide the quality of care that everyone expects to get in the community. That's our goal. The health care provided in the facility should equal what someone's going to get in the community. We have better management of critical care now. One of the things that was discovered internally, separate from DRM's review, was that we had a backlog of medical call slips. We also had a backlog of individuals who needed chronic care follow-up in the community, getting out to be able to do that. Very challenging right now with COVID, managing that. But we've cut back on the backlog of the medical slips, and we are now meeting on a daily basis with our medical provider to take a look at critical care cases within our system, both mental health cases as well as medical cases. And so there's been a lot of work done there, and the communication is starting to pay dividends. I deeply respect the recommendations made by DRM. And we've engaged the Moss Group, which is a national consulting group, one of the leaders in the country on providing consulting services to Corrections Department to help us with not only the change in culture, but also help us with policy. And at my senior staff meeting tomorrow, I'll be directing staff to engage Moss in addressing the policy challenges that were put in front of us by DRM. On the issue of implicit bias, I said this in my two prior public comments about the Johnson case, and I'll repeat it again. It's exactly what Tris Kaufman said. It's very difficult not to have the question in your mind: if Mr. Johnson's race did not play a role in what happened here. Can't say it did, can't say it didn't. But for Jim Baker, the Commissioner of Corrections, that lingers in the back of my mind every time I talk about the Johnson case. It's very difficult in the system, jail system sometimes, to put aside what people are convicted of, what they're charged with, what their backgrounds are, and focus on them as human beings. But that's what we have to do. That's our job. And I'm committed to that cultural change. I want to echo what the Secretary said. We have unbelievable, incredible, hardworking employees. And the more I'm here and the more I'm around them, the more I learn that they have these huge hearts and want to do the right thing. We make mistakes. Sometimes we do things that are unacceptable, and we have to address those. And so the Moss Group is in place. We've already started in our basic training academy, introducing work around equity, fairness, and impartiality. It's now become part of our basic training for our corrections officers, and it's being provided by Tabitha Moore, who's the president of the NAACP in Rome. And that class started with our last two classes, and will continue to morph into a more robust. We also led the conversation at the State House this year, be it remotely, with House Corrections and Institutions and the creation of Senate Bill 24, which focuses on equity within our system and directs us to provide the legislature a report on our plans moving forward. And we'll be doing that at the end of the year and presenting that to the legislature when they return. That will be a blueprint for us moving forward to deal with the issue around equity, implicit bias, and the culture within the department. And so I'm going to end my comments again by thanking Tim and Tris for their work. And I deeply respect the recommendations they've made. And I'm making a commitment publicly today as the commissioner that we're going to implement these changes that need to be made. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to the secretary.
Rachel, let's open it up to questions.
Yes, sir. And thank you all. So we will answer questions in the order that we RSVP'd. So first up, we have Paul Heinz from 7 Days. Paul, if you'd like to unmute yourself, turn on video if you would like.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you very much to everybody. I've got several questions. I will keep going until you cut me off. So when in the initial report from the Office of the it appeared to, the Defender General appeared to allege that DOC was, quote, contractors' gross failure to provide life-saving medical care. I'm wondering if Mr. Coffin could respond to that and tell us whether DOC employees at any time or Centurion employees at any time were trying to prevent the story from coming out fully. Does that make sense?
I think I got the thrust of your question, Paul, but you broke up a little bit. What I understood you to say is, did our investigation reveal any complicity between DOC and the healthcare providers in terms of preventing the story from coming out? Was that it?
Yeah, that's what the Defender General alleged in that in some fashion, the department basically tried to keep some of the details from coming out. So I'm wondering if there was anything that you found that shows, you know, the department or its personnel or the contractor trying to hide information about what happened here.
We did not find anything like that.
So
Thank you. And Paul, we need to keep questions moving along. So if you have a question directly for Commissioner Baker, we have a limited amount of time with the commissioner. If you have one right now, we can ask that. Otherwise, I will need to return to you at the end.
yes, I do have a question for Commissioner Baker, and I've got lots of questions about this. This is not the kind of topic that we deal with from each reporter. I don't think that's. But while
you are breaking up a bit, Paul.
What's that?
You are breaking up a bit.
My question for the commissioner is, and maybe this is for the secretary as well, there's some allusion to the way that future investigations would be handled around incidents like this. I'm trying to understand the process is different now. When there is in a facility, will there always be an independent investigation such as this one, or how have those procedures changed?
I can take that, Paul. and again, I don't want to be critical of prior administrations as commissioner, but my understanding is that in a lot of situations like this in the past, we relied on the Prisoners' Rights Office and others to do reviews, and it was never an administrative review done. And what I heard the secretary say in the lead-in is that engaging DRM to do this work has set a template for the way we will move forward on administrative reviews in the future. Because again, many times the other outside reviews are focused on other areas, and we don't get the benefit of what we're getting from DRM right now.
Okay, but so does that mean that you would hire an outside law?
Didn't say that, Paul. I think
Okay,
it depends on the situation, Paul. And my goal would be is that we're able to do administrative reviews internally in most cases.
Okay.
And thank you, Paul. Next up, we have Lisa from the Associated Press.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great, thanks. I know there was also a state review and personnel review going on. Commissioner Baker, can you give us an update on that? And have any staff been disciplined? Or you mentioned that some staff is no longer at the Newport prison. What happened to them? Did they face discipline or dismissal, or what happened there?
Well, first of all, Lisa, the staff that I'm referring to, I can't comment any further because they're not our staff. They were contract staff that worked for then Centurion. But as far as the corrections staff goes, there is an ongoing personnel investigation looking at the conduct of staff, and that is yet to be determined, the course of that.
Okay, and I know hang on just a minute here. I know the Defender General's office had also asked for you to look at the licenses of healthcare providers. Well, I think the Secretary of State's looking into that. Do you know if that's still ongoing?
I do not, and it's not in my preview to do that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Lisa. Next up, we have the County Courier.
Hi, can you hear me?
Question at this? Yes, we can.
All right. I just want to start out, Commissioner Baker, I believe you described these independent investigators as old friends. I'm wondering if you can maybe just tell us why the public should really look at this as an independent investigation when you describe them as old friends.
Yeah. Again, Tris Coughlin and I have known each other for a long time, back to his days as the U.S. Attorney. So again, I think the question their work would not be fair. I think the report speaks for itself, and when you get a chance to read the report closely, it's pretty critical of the Department of Corrections.
Okay. When was the report first made available to state officials, and were there any draft reports that were made available to state officials, or was it just the final report?
I'll let Tris answer that question.
Yeah, we did share a draft with the state. I think it was last Thursday, and they made some comments. We considered those, and then we issued our final report to them on Friday evening, about 8 o'clock, I think it was.
What kind of substantial changes were made from the draft report to the final report?
There really were no substantive changes. They wanted some policies spelled out in slightly different ways. We thought about it and wrote our report as we saw fit.
Okay. I'll hold off on any further questions for time purposes. Maybe if we have time, I'll get one in at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Next, we have Liz Murray from the Burlington Free Press.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes, we
Hi,
can.
Liz.
Great, hi. So I just wondered, Commissioner Baker, how many DOC employees are being looked at as part of the personnel investigation?
I don't have that number right now. I think it's going to be the folks that were involved in interaction with Mr. Johnson, but I don't have that number right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Liz, and we can follow up with you on that when we have that number gathered. And next up, we have Todd from the Caledonian Record. Todd, are you there? Okay.
No questions. Liz.
Okay, no questions? All right, thank you. And next up, we have Liam from VPR.
Hi, I was wondering, Tris, if in your investigation, if you made any determination whether DOC staff's actions constituted employee misconduct?
That actually was not really within the ambit of our report. We were asked to look into the facts and circumstances, and the personnel actions and the way that whole process works is really governed by regulation and law, and is a really different animal than what we were looking at. We made our findings. We made some policy recommendations, understanding that there may well be this different personnel process that occurs, but that's being handled by the state of Vermont.
Well, I guess maybe this would be a follow-up then for Commissioner Baker. If you thought it was right to bring in an outside kind of party to investigate this situation, why not have them also look at employee actions? Why are you handling that internally when you were having an outside investigator kind of look at policies that led to issues? I mean, isn't it possible that some of the policies that you're going to be using to evaluate these actions of employees also might need some revision?
Well, the first part of your comment is true, that there's clearly policies that need revision. The fact of the matter is, contractually and by state employment policy and law, there are certain procedures we have to follow in order to honor the due process rights of our employees. And outside investigative arms are not the proper avenue to do that.
Should there be an independent review of any specific policies around employee conduct? Is that under the purview of what you've had Downs, Rackle, and Martin look at?
Can you repeat that again? Because I think what I'm trying to say to you is that there is a process contractually on how employees' investigations are done. So you can't step outside the contractual obligations.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Eric from the Times-Argus and the Rutland Herald.
Thank you. I see parts of the report are redacted. Why is that?
I'll take that, and we can talk to our general counsel can chime in as well. The parts that are redacted are specific medical conditions of various people. So for HIPAA reasons, we had to redact because there's a HIPAA requirement. We had to redact things like blood pressure, all those sort of things that are in there. Talk about medical condition of Mr. Johnson and others as well. So that's what's redacted in here. And Todd, do you want to chime in? Todd's the general counsel of the agency.
Nothing to add, Secretary, unless there's a follow-up question.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have 4 people left in the queue, and that's good timing. We have about 5 minutes left with Commissioner Baker. So next up, we have Tim McChristen from Vermont Business Magazine. Tim, do you have a question? Tim, can you hear us? Okay. We'll return to you. And then Alan Keyes, Vermont Digger.
Yes, I think this question is for Mr. Coffin. For the employee, were you able to interview all the DOC employees who you wanted to interview? Did any refuse to be interviewed?
Yeah, I could answer that question, but if you don't mind, Alan, I'm going to ask my partner to answer it so he gets to talk a little bit. Okay. Tim, can you answer that for him?
Yeah, Alan, all the Department of Corrections employees that we asked to interview consented to interviews with us.
And also, what is the status of Mr. Rutherford, who was the superintendent? He was placed on leave shortly after this incident by the former commissioner. Can you say why he was placed on leave and what his current status is to the department?
I'll take that, Alan. What I will say is that I wasn't the commissioner at the time, and my understanding is that that had nothing to do with Mr. Johnson's death, and it was unrelated to that. And Mr. Rutherford is currently serving as part of the Incident Command overhead management team for the COVID response.
Can you say
along with other duties?
Was he moved to that position as a result of this incident?
As I said, I wasn't the commissioner at the time. And as my understanding that it had nothing to do with this incident.
But his moving to the kind of central office, did that have to do with Mr. Johnson's death and his handling of that?
Alan, what I'm saying to you is it had nothing to do with Mr. Johnson's death.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you were saying that the reason he was placed on leave was because of that.
No, just to be clear.
Thank you, Alan. If you have other questions, I will circle back through the list at the end, but I do need to keep moving down. We have 2 more in the queue. Mike Donahue.
Thank you. Couple of things, Secretary Smith, could we get the specific section of the HIPAA law that you're referring to pertaining to information on dead people not being certain medical information at some point, if you could share that with us? For Tim,
Todd, can you make sure that Mike Donahue gets that?
Happy to share that, Mike.
Thanks. Thank you. Tim, clarification, how many Department of Corrections employees did you interview?
The exact number I don't have off the top of my head, Mike. I'd refer you to our report, but it was somewhere in the neighborhood of between 5 and 10.
5 and 10. And last thing, both of you are experienced prosecutors, and I know Tris nicely dodged Liam's question, but I'm going to ask it a different way. As experienced prosecutors, you must have had a gut feeling, both of you, as to whether there was some criminal conduct here, and probably would have said, oh God, look at that, boy, we got something here. So what did you see when your gut feeling was talking as opposed to the independent investigator? What did your gut tell you?
I'll tell you my gut. I'll let you have Tim can tell you his gut. My gut was there. I didn't see anything criminal here. It was just a tragedy that resulted from, kind of not strong enough policies empowering people to take the responsibilities that they needed to take. It just is unconscionable that somebody can complain of not breathing for that period of time and not get the care that he needed. I didn't see anybody intentionally trying to cause his demise, but it was really not a a strong enough set of policies that empowered people to do what they needed to do. Tim, what do you think about that?
I agree with that. And as we discussed before, Mike, you know, as you go through our opinions that we set forth in our report, you'll see that there were a series of interconnected decisions, policy weaknesses, and paths that led to this tragedy, rather than one single issue that can be pointed to.
Commissioner Baker, if you're leaving, let me just ask one thing. You said 45 deaths were too many in 10 years. I mean, some of those are whatever, natural causes, whatever, and some are other things. I mean, what is the breakdown of that 45 actually?
I don't have that, Mike. We can attempt to get that for you if you want to connect with Rachel.
Thank you very much, all of you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mike. And I know you have my email address, so we can connect on that. And then we have Dom Amato, WCAX. Dom, are you with us? Dom, I see you on the call. Are you there? Do you have a question? Okay. So we've come down through the queue of all of our questions. We would like to be able to wrap this up in the next 7 minutes, but in the next 7 minutes, if anybody does have any further questions for this group, please raise your hand or unmute yourselves. And
I've got a question. This is Paul Heinz.
All right, Paul.
Got a couple of questions, and hopefully everyone can make a little bit more time for this. This is a dense report with a lot in it that needs to be explored, obviously. So just to follow up on Mike Donohue's question, I am wondering if Mr. Coffin referred any information that he gleaned to law enforcement officials. And I'm also wondering whether the chief medical examiner suggested this could rise to the level of criminal neglect. And I'm wondering if you think that it does.
Well, let me just think about your question for a second, Paul. You know, first of all, I don't think I could share with you whether I referred information or not to authorities, and I don't want you to read anything into that. But if I did, I don't think I would be sharing that with you. Secondly, I'm not going to provide an opinion or a response on whether I think it rises to the level of criminal neglect. We've looked at the facts that we've looked at and provided details on those. I think an important part of any story that would result in a decision on a criminal charge beyond a reasonable doubt would necessarily need to include some understanding of what the healthcare providers say. You know, they did not cooperate in this investigation. They did not let us interview any of them. The upshot of that is there's some unknown information here. I will say that I think that the Department of Corrections staff, and this is in our report, I think expressed as our opinion most kind of specifically, we're in a difficult position because they were in the context of getting medical direction from the medical staff. We concluded after looking at that, nonetheless, the policies need to be strengthened in the Department of Corrections to empower corrections staff, not just medical staff, to do what needs to get done to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again. Someone suffering from an apparently acute medical condition, or that at least there's significant questions about that.
Okay. I also wanted to follow up on Greg's line of questioning about how independent this report was. I'm struck by your statement, Mr. Coffin, that that you provided an advance copy of this report to the state. and that the state weighed in on the policy changes that you were to recommend, and that may have perhaps led to changes in your final report. That doesn't sound independent, and I'm wondering if you could allay our concerns and provide an initial copy, the initial copy that you gave the state to us, because it would be helpful to know, what they wanted to change and why you changed it.
Let me think about that, Paul. I will say it's not uncommon for an initial copy of an investigative report to be shared. At the end of the day, the report is our report. They, I'm sure, don't agree with a lot of things that are in the report. Hopefully, they agree with some. I think they've taken it with the attitude of a constructive criticism. But that's what I would say to that.
I would say one thing.
One second. We have Mike. We need to wrap this up in the next 2 minutes.
Rachel, I don't understand why you need to wrap this up. This is a report on the death of an inmate. We haven't had a chance to fully review this, and we've had not very much time to ask questions. I think we all have more questions, and I think it's reasonable that we be given an opportunity to ask those questions.
I understand.
Mike Donahue has a follow-up. I think he was trying to ask.
I understand, and Mike and Paul, I hear both of you. We are available, and we are as available as we could possibly be, and we need to end this call for the purposes of other scheduling commitments, but we are able to respond to you via email. I know all of you have my email. You send us questions, we will get you answers to the best of our ability and what we can release. This is not an attempt to stop a discussion of a difficult conversation. This is because this is a scheduling matter.
Well, in the future, you should schedule more time for this, because I think we all have more questions.
I'll take that into consideration, Paul. Thank you.
And we're making a formal request for the draft copy that was in the hands of the state. So that's a public records request right now.
And I second that.
I would ask that you please submit that in writing to the parties that are able to respond to public records requests. And I know that you are both familiar with our public records officers.
If we have one more minute, can you please
be in writing?
I'm asking for it as well, Tigger.
If you have one more question, if you have time for one more question, I wonder if you can tell us about the status of any lawsuits involving this, or any criminal investigations involving this. Are there lawsuits pending by the family of Mr. Johnson against Centurion? Is there any kind of litigation in the works at the moment?
I can
go ahead, Commissioner Baker.
I am not aware of any pending litigation.
And any criminal investigations you're aware of?
I'm not aware of any criminal investigations.
I got more questions if you've got more time.
I unfortunately, Paul, for me, I do have to leave for another commitment, but as Rachel said, we will make ourselves available to follow up on questions.
Absolutely.
Back to you, Rachel.
Yes. So for everybody who has requested public records, what we will need is that in writing. What we're going to do right now is we do need to end this call. However, I have taken notes on the outstanding questions that were asked today that we're asked to follow up on, and we will do that to the best of our ability and as the law allows. Beyond that, when it comes to public records requests, as I said, if you need my assistance, you can email me with the formal public records request, and I will get that to our public records officer at DOC. DOC may not be the right entity for that public records request, but I will make sure it gets into the right hands. And then finally, we will answer every question possible. If there are things that come to you after this meeting, if there are things that come to you tomorrow, a week down the road, 2 months down the road, We are here and we are fully transparent in our acceptance and our acknowledgement and our commitment to honoring what has been found in this report. And with that,
clarification of what you just said. So there's other people besides the Department of Corrections that received this report? Is that what you're saying? That other people that may have the report? Who would those be?
that is not at all what I'm saying or implying. What I'm saying is that for any public records requests that deal with files, there may be other entities who need to issue those public records.
Who would those be?
Sir, if you would send a public records request my way, I know that we can work on that. So I know that you all have my email. This has been recorded. I will send this out to everyone on the call, and I will send it out to our entire press list. It will also be posted to the DOC website. If there are further questions, again, please email me. I know that this is a short press conference today, and I appreciate all of your patience with this. And again, feel free to bombard my email. You know where I am.
Rachel, perhaps we can schedule a follow-up press conference.
Thank you, Greg. We will definitely take that under consideration. All right. So with that, I am going to thank you all for joining us. And I understand that you got the release a bit late. And all I can say is Vermont Internet. So thank you again. Feel free to bombard my email, send me your public records requests, send me your follow-up questions. Thank you to Tristan, thank you to Timothy, thank you to Secretary Smith, and thank you to Commissioner Baker for being here with us today for the press conference. And we are committed to talking about this as much as possible.
Just got off a testy press conference with commissioners of corrections and stuff about Kenneth Johnson's death. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, everyone. So with that, I'm going to end this call.
Well, I guess we were trying to ask more questions. It just seemed like the timing, it was very rushed, like the amount of time that people had to ask questions. They sent the report like 2 minutes before the press conference.
Paul, as a friend, I'm going to tell you that you're not.
They sent the report,
That's
the 38
Alan
page
Keyes,
report,
who's unmuted.
like 2 minutes before the press conference. So
Don't end this. We want to hear what he has to say.
I haven't even read the report yet, so
Alan,
it's kind of hard.
Alan.